Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for coming and maybe checking in. This is a follow-up video on a $6,000 Hermes bag that I sold on Poshmark and the authentication process. I have to tell you, it was a really nerve-wracking experience because it was such a high dollar item, and I searched everywhere for information on other people's experience about selling on Poshmark with the authentication process, and I had a really difficult time finding any information. So if you are selling things on Poshmark and you are using the authentication process, hopefully this information will be useful to you based on my experience. So just to recap, and I do have a video that I will link in the description below that you can look at about the sale that took place. And I will admit that was it was about 8 months ago. This is the follow-up video. So I really appreciate you if you had seen the previous video and now checking in on the follow-up. You've been waiting a long time for this. So let me just summarize in letting you know that I sold an Hermes bag, a pre-owned Hermes bag on Poshmark for $6,000, and it was the biggest sale of my life, and I was really, really grateful for that. It happened around the holiday season at the end of the year, like after Christmas, but going into the new year. And I reached out to Poshmark to get some questions answered about their authentication process, specifically with the very first step, which was shipping the item to their authentication center or their Poshmark HQ. And the reason I wanted to reach out to them and ask them some specific questions was because the label, as people who sell on Poshmark know, it is a priority mailing label that Poshmark provides, and you automatically get $100 of insurance. Well, there's a big differential between $6,000 and $100. So I wanted to ask Poshmark, how do I insure the bag up to its value? I received an email back that just was a blanket email, just a template email that said, use the Poshmark label. So I was not going to do that. I was not going to risk sending a $6,000 bag in the USPS priority mail system, and who knows what happens if it doesn't show up. So I did some of my own research, and I found out that I could use a third-party insurance company, and I could insure it up to $5,000. And I got this information from USPS directly. Obviously, the bag was worth significantly more than $5,000, so I chose to use FedEx to deliver it and had it insured up to its value of $6,000. Sent that to Poshmark headquarters, required a signature, and I was happy that it arrived. I received confirmation from FedEx that it arrived safely, that it was signed for, so I knew that it had made it there. Then, about a day later, I received an email from Poshmark saying, hey, we got your item, but shame on you that you didn't use our Poshmark label. So, as you can imagine, I was on pins and needles, hoping that everything went through the authentication process properly, and that the bag was then sent to the buyer, and that the buyer was happy. I was checking my emails and my Poshmark notifications every single day, where, just checking what the disposition of the bag was at different points in time. I did get updates as it went along the process, so that was really a really nice feature that Poshmark offered. And then once I got confirmation that it was delivered to the buyer, I was sitting on pins and needles, just hoping that the buyer was happy with the purchase. Here's where, again, another blank spot of knowledge with Poshmark's authentication process. I don't know how it's presented to the buyer in the end after it's gone through authentication. Does Poshmark repackage it and make it beautiful and the way that I would have done it, with a note of thanks, a certificate of authentication? I just don't know. I can't find any information about that, and I have asked Poshmark about it, and again, no response. So in the end, I just want to let everybody know that the transaction went through. I was so happy that the buyer was happy with their purchase. I did not get feedback on it, so I was a little bit surprised about that on an item with such high value. You know, one of the other things that made me nervous was this was not a Poshmark account. It was purchased by someone who was a guest buyer within the Poshmark platform. So that was another thing that caused my nerves to unravel a bit. But in the end, everything did turn out really well. I think my biggest piece of advice to people selling luxury items on Poshmark So thanks again for checking in and following up on that transaction. And another thing I'd like to let you know is there is another Hermes bag that is available on Poshmark. It is also available on eBay. Here's a bonus tip for you. If you're selling Hermes branded items on eBay, you cannot use the accent grave over the second E in Hermes, that accent mark, because people who just type in Hermes, Hermes, it won't show up unless they're using that specific accent grave. So my bonus tip for you today is if you're selling Hermes on eBay, remove that accent grave and just type in Hermes in the item description. So there you go. Thanks everyone. Appreciate your patience in this follow-up video. Take care.